A fierce dogfight left pilots wounded, lives upended. And national wounds, Saburo Sakai nearly died, lost most vision in one eye, and veterans on both sides carried trauma and bitterness. Yet from that violence came survival, unlikely friendship, reconciliation, and a lasting message of resilience and peace as Sakai and Harold Jones transformed enmity into mutual respect. August 7, 1942. Above Guadalcanal, a Japanese Zero swoops into an attack on a group of American dive bombers. A rear gunner returns fire. One bullet pierces the Zero's canopy and strikes the pilot in the head. The American airmen watch the Zero pitch up and seem to see it go out of control. The pilot slumps forward and appears dead. The formation counts the aircraft as a kill and heads back to the carrier. But Saburo Sakai was not dead. Blinded in one eye, bleeding and barely conscious, he managed to fly 560 miles back to base. The trip took nearly 5 hours. 41 years later, Sakai met the gunner who had shot him, Harold Jones. They exchanged gifts, shook hands, and became friends. Saburo Sakai was born in 1916 in Saga Prefecture, Japan. His family traced its roots to samurai ancestors, but had become farmers after the Meiji Restoration forced former warriors into civilian life. When his father died and Sakai was 11, his options narrowed. At 16, with few prospects, he joined the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1933. He served as a gunner aboard the battleships Kirishima and Haruna. In 1937, after failing the entrance exam twice, he finally passed Naval Flight School on his third attempt. The training was brutal. Matches that could cause injury, swimming tests meant to eliminate the weak, and strict standards that relegated underperforming trainees to regular duty in disgrace. Sakai graduated top of his class and received a silver watch personally presented by Emperor Hirohito. By 1942, he was an experienced combat pilot, having flown missions over China, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and New Guinea. He had mastered the A6M-0, a light, highly maneuverable fighter that in skilled hands was deadly. Official tallies credit him with 28 victories. In his memoir, he claims more than 60. Harold Jones was an American sailor who served as a rear gunner on SBD Dauntless dive bombers. The SBD was a rugged armored plane built to attack ships. Its rear gunner sat facing aft with twin 30-caliber machine guns to defend the aircraft from pursuing fighters. Jones and his pilot were part of the air group from USS Enterprise, one of the carriers supporting the Marine landings on Guadalcanal in August 1942. The Guadalcanal operation was the United States' first major offensive in the Pacific. The Japanese had begun building an airfield there that, if completed, would allow their bombers to threaten Allied supply routes across the South Pacific. The Marines had to seize it. On August 7, 1942, as Marines assaulted the beaches, Japanese planes from Rabaul, some 560 miles away, launched counterattacks. Saburo Sakai and his squadron were among them. They took off that morning from Rabaul and flew for hours to reach Guadalcanal. Once over the island, they fought American fighters protecting the landing forces. In one extended dogfight, Sakai shot down an F-4F Wildcat piloted by James Pug Sutherland. Both men showed exceptional skill in the engagement, and ultimately Sakai's fire damaged Sutherland's left wing route and sent the Wildcat down. Sutherland survived and later became an ace himself. After that fight, Sakai believed he had located a formation of 8 F-4F Wildcats and moved in to attack from the rear. He was mistaken. The planes were actually SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and dive bombers carried rear gunners. He realized his error only when he closed in and the tail gunners opened fire. All 8 rear gunners engaged him at once. Tracer and shell fragments filled the sky. Cannon shells and machine gun bullets ripped into his Zero. Among those gunners was Harold Jones. Jones watched pieces of Sakai's plane fly away. The canopy shattered. The Zero's nose rose, and it seemed to stall. Through the broken canopy, Jones glimpsed what looked like an unmoving pilot collapsed in the cockpit. Sakai's Zero climbed away in an apparently uncontrollable climb. Jones and the others believed they had killed him. The formation returned to Enterprise and reported the Zero destroyed. But Sakai was alive. A .30 caliber round had passed through the canopy and struck him just above his right eye. destroying vision in that eye. For an instant, he thought of ending his life in a kamikaze dive into an American ship, but there were no targets close enough, only jungle and sea below. He then thought of duty. He was a section leader, his squadron needed seasoned pilots, and Japan needed experienced airmen. Suicide would accomplish nothing, so he chose to try to get home. With a badly damaged but still flyable Zero, bleeding and half-blind, he set course for Rabaul, 560 miles away, and began the longest flight of his life. The journey took nearly 5 hours. Ground crews at Rabaul ran toward his aircraft expecting to find a corpse. Instead, he insisted on filing an after-action report with his commanding officer before accepting medical aid. Only after delivering that report did he collapse. Doctors doubted he would survive. The head wound was severe and infection likely, and even if he lived, he would probably never fly again. Saburo Sakai did survive. He lost most of the vision in his right eye permanently, spent months recovering, and by 1944 had returned to combat, flying a one-eyed sortie in a Zero over. The fighting ended in August 1945, and Sakai left the Navy to return to civilian life. He married, opened a small printing shop, and employed fellow veterans who struggled to find work. He embraced Buddhism and vowed never again to take a life, not even to swat a mosquito. For years, the memory of that day over Guadalcanal stayed with him. In the 1970s, something unexpected happened. His memoir, Samurai, was translated into English and found an audience in the United States. American pilots and historians read it, and former servicemen began to contact him. In 1970, Sakai attended a meeting of the American Fighter Aces Association in San Diego as the only Japanese pilot present. An American P-51 Mustang ace, speaking through a translator, told him, "Please tell Saburo that I read his book twice." The feelings he described were the same I felt in combat, and I'm glad we share that understanding. That encounter shifted Sakai's perspective. American aviators no longer appeared simply as enemies, but as fellow pilots who had faced the same fear, adrenaline, and impossible choices. In the early 1980s, historian Henry Sakata traced the August 7, 1942, engagement over Guadalcanal, and identified several of the SBD rear gunners who had fired on Sakai. One was Harold Jones. Sakata arranged a reunion near Los Angeles in 1983, and Sakai and Jones met for the first time since the battle 41 years earlier. Sakai brought his leather flying helmet, the very one he'd worn that day, still marked by the bullet hole from Jones's shot, the round having passed just above the right eye. Jones inspected the helmet and saw undeniable proof of his firing. He had hit Sakai in the head from a moving aircraft while exchanges of fire continued. The two men exchanged stories. Sakai described his long flight back to Rabaul, and Jones recounted watching the Zero climb away, convinced he had killed its pilot. They found mutual respect. Both were professionals who had carried out their duties. There was no hatred, just two men who had once been adversaries and survived. They became friends, corresponded occasionally, and appeared together at veterans' events. When asked later about meeting the man who had shot him, Sakai answered simply, "To me, the war was never personal." In his later years, Sakai became a voice for peace. He spoke at schools and companies across Japan and urged perseverance. The same resolve that had kept him flying 560 miles with a bullet wound now defined his civilian life. He visited the United States multiple times, met former foes, and attended military reunions. He even consulted briefly on Microsoft's Combat Flight Simulator 2 to help ensure authentic aircraft handling. Sakai also drew attention and criticism at home for publicly urging Japan to accept responsibility for the wars in Asia and the Pacific, a stance that angered some veterans, but he did not waver. On September 22, 2000, while attending a formal dinner at Atsugi Naval Air Station as an honored guest of the U.S. Navy, he suffered a heart attack and died that night at age 84, surrounded by American officers who regarded him as a friend. Relatively few Japanese veterans attended his funeral. Many resented his friendly ties with former enemies and his critiques of Japan's wartime conduct. Harold Jones lived on for several more years, dying in 2008 at age 88. The friendship between Sakai and Jones embodied something deeper. Two men who had tried to kill one another in 1942 met decades later, shook hands, and found common ground. They recognized each other as professionals who had done their duty under harrowing circumstances. There was no lingering malice, only mutual respect. Sakai's mistake in attacking those dive bombers from the rear nearly cost him his life. Yet his determination to fly 560 miles half-blinded and bleeding demonstrated extraordinary courage and skill, earning admiration on both sides. American pilots who read his memoir saw in him a kindred spirit. They had felt the same fear, made split-second errors, and faced life-or-death decisions. The reconciliation of Sakai and Jones showed that foes in war need not remain enemies in peace. Decades later, they could acknowledge the past and move forward with respect rather than hatred. Saburo Sakai and Harold Jones proved that one bullet, one miraculous flight, 41 years, and finally a handshake could turn combatants into competitors.